Good morning, philosophers. It has been a month to the day since I've recorded one of these. Life got a little crazy there on my end, and so I had to take a pause. So we are back. And we're going to pick up exactly where we left off. I'm going to rewind just a little bit because he was about to say some dumb shit about property. So we can address it maybe. Let's see. The geometrician teaches me how I may avoid losing any fraction of my estates, but what I really want to learn is how to lose the lot and still keep smiling. That's good. But I'm being turned off the land my father and grandfather owned before me. Well, so what? Who owned the land before your grandfather? Are you in a position to identify the community, let alone the individual to whom it originally belonged? You entered on it as a tenant, not an absolute owner. Whose tenant, you may ask? Your heirs, and that only if you're lucky. The legal experts say that acquisition by prescription never applies where the property concerned is actually public property. Well, what you possess and call your own is really public property, or mankind's property for that matter. Oh, the marvels of geometry. You geometers can calculate the areas of circles, can reduce any given shape to a square, can state the distances separating stars. Nothing's outside your scope when it comes to measurement. Well, if you're such an expert, measure a man's soul. Tell me how large or small that is. You can define a straight line. What use is that to you if you've no idea what straightness means in life? I come now to the person who prides himself on his familiarity with the heavenly bodies. Quote, towards which quarter chilly Saturn draws, the orbits in which burning Mercury roams. End quote. What is to be gained from this sort of knowledge? Am I supposed to feel anxious when Saturn and Mars are in opposition, or Mercury sets in the evening in full view of Saturn? Instead of coming to learn that bodies like these are equally propitious wherever they are, and incapable of change in any case. They are swept on in a path from which they cannot escape. Their motion governed by an uninterrupted sequence of destined events, making their reappearances in cycles that are fixed. They either actuate or signalize all that comes about in the universe. My goodness. This is just a couple pages of nonsense. If every event is brought about by them, how is mere familiarity with a process which is unchangeable going to be of any help? If they are pointers to events, what difference does it make to be aware in advance of things you cannot escape? What? If you could, he's saying, if we have a way to predict the future, what difference does it make? I mean, seems obvious. They are going to happen whether you know about them or not. I mean, okay. We're losing it here, Seneca. Quote, if you observe the hasting sun and watch the stars processing through the skies, the day that follows will not prove you wrong, nor will deceptive cloud-free nights then take you in. End quote. I've taken sufficient precautions, more than sufficient precautions, to ensure that I'm not taken in by deceptive phenomena. At this, you'll protest, quote, can you really say the day that follows never proves me wrong? End quote. Surely anything that happens... Sorry, we're still in the quote. Can you really say the day that follows never proves me wrong? Surely anything that happens which one didn't know in advance was going to happen proves one wrong. End quote. Well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know what's capable of happening. And none of this will give rise to any protest on my part. I'm ready for everything. If I'm let off in any way, I'm pleased. The day in question proves me wrong in a sense if it treats me leniently, but even so not really wrong. For just as I know that anything is capable of happening, so also do I know that it's not bound to happen. So I look for the best and am prepared for the opposite. You'll have to bear with me if I digress here. Nothing will induce me to accept painters into the list of liberal arts any more than sculptor. What? Hold on. You'll have to bear with me if I digress here. Nothing will induce me to accept painters into the list of liberal arts any more than sculptors, marble masons, and all the other attendants or on extravagance. I must equally reject those oil and dust practitioners, the wrestlers, or else I shall have to include in the list the perfumers and cooks and all the others who place their talents at the service of our pleasures. What is there, I ask you, that's liberal about those characters who vomit up their food to empty their stomachs for more, with their bodies stuffed full and their minds all starved and inactive? Can we possibly look on this as a liberal accomplishment for the youth of Rome, whom our ancestors trained to stand up straight and throw a javelin, to toss the caber, and manage a horse and handle weapons? They never used to teach their children anything which could be learned in a reclining posture. That kind of training, nevertheless, doesn't teach or foster moral values any more than the other. What's the use, after all, of mastering a horse and controlling him with the reins at full gallop if you're carried away yourself by totally unbridled emotions? What's the use of overcoming opponent after opponent in the wrestling or boxing rings if you can be overcome by your temper? Quote, so we don't, you may ask, in fact gain anything from the liberal studies. As far as character is concerned, no, but we gain a good deal from them in other directions. Just as even these admittedly inferior arts which we've been talking about, the ones that are based on the use of hands, make important contributions to the amenities of life, although they have nothing to do with character. Why, then, do we give our sons a liberal education? Not because it can make them morally good, but because it prepares the mind for the acquisition of moral values. Just as that grounding in grammar, as they called it in the old days, in which boys are given their elementary schooling, does not teach them the liberal arts, but prepares the ground for knowledge of them in due course. So when it comes to character, the liberal arts open the way to it, rather than carry the personality all the way there. In this connection, I feel prompted to take a look at individual qualities of character. Bravery is the one which treats with contempt things ordinarily inspiring fear, despising and defying and demolishing all the things that terrify us and set chains on human freedom. Is she in any way fortified by liberal studies? Take loyalty, the most sacred quality that can be found in a human breast, never corrupted by a bribe, never driven to betray any form of compulsion, crying, quote, beat me, burn me, put me to death, I shall not talk. The more the torture probes my secrets, the deeper I'll hide them, end quote. Can liberal studies create that kind of spirit? Take self-control, the quality which takes command of the pleasures. Some she dismisses out of hand, unable to tolerate them. Others she merely regulates, ensuring that they are brought within healthy limits. Never approaching pleasures for their own sake, she realizes that the ideal limit with things you desire is not the amount you would like to, but the amount you ought to take. Humanity is the quality which stops one being arrogant towards one's fellows, or being acrimonious. In other words, in actions, in emotions, she reveals herself as kind and good-natured toward all. To her, the troubles of anyone else are her own, and anything that benefits herself she welcomes primarily because it will be of benefit to someone else. Do the liberal studies inculcate these attitudes? No. No more than they do simplicity, or modesty and restraint, or frugality and thrift, or mercy, the mercy that is as sparing with another's blood as though it were its own, knowing that it is not for man to make wasteful use of man. Someone will ask me how I can say that liberal studies are of no help towards morality when I've just been saying that there's no attaining morality without them. My answer would be this: There's no attaining morality without food either, but there's no connection between morality and food. The fact that a ship can't begin to exist without the timbers of which it's built doesn't mean that the timbers are of help to it. There's no reason for you to assume that X, being something without which Y could never have come about, Y came about as a result of the assistance of X. And indeed, it can actually be argued that the attainment of wisdom is perfectly possible without the liberal studies. Although moral values are things which have to be learnt, they are not learnt through these studies. Besides, what grounds could I possibly have for supposing that a person who has no acquaintance with books will never be a wise man? For wisdom does not lie in books. Wisdom publishes not words, but truths. And I'm not sure that the memory isn't more reliable when it has no external aids to fall back on. There is nothing small or cramped about wisdom. It is something calling for a lot of room to move. There are questions to be answered concerning physical as well as human matters, questions about the past and about the future, questions about things eternal and things ephemeral. I need to look up how to pronounce that. Questions about time itself. On this one subject of time, just look how many questions there are. To start with, does it have an existence of its own? Next, does anything exist prior to time, independently of it? Did it begin with the universe, or did it exist even before then on the grounds that there was something in existence before the universe? There are countless questions about the soul alone, where it comes from, what its nature is, when it begins to exist, and how long it is in existence. Whether it passes from one place to another, moving house, so to speak, on transfer to successive living creatures, taking on a different form with each, or is no more than once in service and then is released to roam the universe, whether it is a corporeal substance or not. What it will do when it ceases to act through us, how it will employ its freedom once it has escaped its cage here, whether it will forget its past and become conscious of its real nature from the actual moment of its parting from the body and departure for its new home on high. Whatever the field of physical or moral sciences you deal with, you will be given no rest by the mass of things to be learnt or investigated. And to enable matters of this range and scale to find unrestricted hospitality in our minds, everything superfluous must be turned out. Virtue will not bring herself to enter the limited space we offer her. Something of great size requires plenty of room. Let everything else be evicted, and your heart completely opened to her. Quote, but it's a nice thing, surely, to be familiar with a lot of subjects. End quote. Well, in that case, let us retain just as much of them as we need. Would you consider a person open to criticism for putting superfluous objects on the same level as really useful ones by arranging on display in his house a whole array of costly articles, but not for cluttering himself up with a lot of superfluous furniture in the way of learning? To want to know more than is sufficient is a form of intemperance, apart from which this kind of obsession with the liberal arts turns people into pedantic, irritating, tactless, self-satisfied bores, not learning what they need simply because they spend their time learning things they will never need. The scholar Didymus wrote 4,000 works. I should feel sorry for him if he had merely read so many useless works. In these works he discusses such questions as Homer's origin, who was Aeneas's real mother, whether Anacaron's manner of life was more that of a lecher or that of a drunkard, whether Sappho slept with anyone who asked her, and other things that would be better unlearned if one actually knew them. Don't you go and tell me now that life is long enough for this sort of thing. When you come to writers in our own school, for that matter, I'll show you plenty of works which could do with some ruthless pruning. It costs a person an enormous amount of time and other people's ears an enormous amount of boredom before he earns such compliments as, what a learned person. Let's be content with the much less fashionable label, what a good man. What about thinking how much time you lose through constantly being taken up with official matters, private matters, or ordinary everyday matters? through sleep, through ill health. Measure your life. It just does not have room for so much. I have been speaking about liberal studies, yet look at the amount of useless and superfluous matter to be found in the philosophers. Even they have descended to the level of drawing distinctions between the uses of different syllables and discussing the proper meanings of prepositions and conjunctions. They have come to envy the philologist and the mathematician, and they have taken over all the inessential elements in those studies, with the result that they know more about devoting care and attention to their speech than about devoting such attention to their lives. Listen, and let me show you the sorry consequences to which subtlety carried too far can lead, and what an enemy it is to truth. We will stop there today. Felt good to read again. There was a lot of nonsense in there about public property ownership, among other things. But I do appreciate the disparaging of publishing a lot of nonsense. I've been, I think about this stuff constantly for Disenthrall. There was a couple times when I tried to make daily content, daily vlogs, and there was another time where I tried to commit to like daily shows, and I would talk about current events. And when I look back on that content, I find that it's my least valuable. Like, yeah, I was creating things, but I mean, like most of the topics I talked about were just hot topics of the day. They're gone. It's like, it's fluff now. Quality over quantity. Okay. The thing I wanted to talk about was, I did a TikTok. Well, I joined TikTok just to experiment with it. And honestly, I think the platform is garbage. It might be the worst social media. It's full. Like if you don't follow a bunch of people and you just let it determine your feed, it is full of a bunch of grown children, narcissists, and just vapid shells of humanity, amping other people. But what I actually like about it, and the reason why I keep using it, is because it lets you post videos, which is awesome, but it limits your time to like 1 or 3 minutes. And I find it's a really good, useful mental challenge for me to take thoughts and ideas and compress them down into shorter messages. Longer than Twitter, so it's still possible to get a complete thought out, but I still have to be very, very terse with it. Anyway, that's all to say. I was thinking about cultural appropriation because there's a lot of people on TikTok that lose their entire minds about anything, really, honestly. Because I don't actually, no, I'm wrong. They didn't have their minds to begin with, but they just go looking for things to be victims over. And, we're all familiar with this at this point. I'm not breaking any news with this, but what I was, the thought that I was advancing was that the internet has enabled this. Like, this stuff would not exist to near the degree without the internet. Why? Because the internet has enabled communities to form around completely esoteric, tiny things. Like, you can find groups on the internet or people that like building with Legos, but, not just building with Legos, specifically building like Gundam mechs with Legos. Like, you can find groups for anything, and communities are able to be formed and built up around them. People are able to feel like they're not alone. People are able to find a sense of community with people that they've never met, don't live anywhere near, will never meet, and merely talk to digitally. That's a great thing in a lot of ways. It's allowed a lot of communities to spring up and further the ideas of esoteric philosophies and ideas and things that would have never existed otherwise. Like anarcho-capitalism, for example. The downside is that same thing, that capacity to build community around things, has allowed people to build communities around very toxic, very unhealthy things like victimhood. This was what I talked about on TikTok. This is the long version of my thoughts, I guess. These communities so people have this desire to have community around them, to have support, to have friends, and sort of like an extended family of people they can depend on and talk to and relate their problems to and get assistance from and get backed up when they're in trouble, they get backup or they get support. Humans need that. And when humans are lonely, they can go looking, consciously or not, they can go looking for somewhere to belong socially. And the internet has enabled people to find that in very unhealthy ways by grouping with other people that share the same type of victimhood. And the thing about victimhood is it's not a tangible thing that can be sort of proven or detected or objectively measured, because it's a state of mind. It's between your own two ears. Like, whether or not you're a victim is something that can be detected. Like, somebody stabbed you. Okay, you are a victim. But the mindset you take on after that is up to you. You can decide that for yourself. You can decide to feel and act like you were victimized and your life is over. Oh no, a criminal stabbed me and I survived, and now I have maybe a medical issue or something like that, and so woe is me, and what's the point of going on? The whole world's out to get me. It's a dangerous place, so I'm not going to leave my house anymore. You can refactor your life and your entire thinking around this event and really own that victimhood state of mind. Or you can reject that, and you can choose to not feel like that and to not let it control who you are. But anyway, because it's a state of mind, it can be chosen. That was the first point. And it can be faked, and it can be exaggerated, and it can be chosen even if there was never an actual seminal event that would have given a normal person reason for it. This is running long, so I'm going to try and shorten it up again. Sorry, but if it's just a state of mind, then you can claim a victim status over anything right now. There's nothing stopping you. And so what this allows people to do is link up on the internet and center communities around other people that have claimed this victim status, whether or not they were actually harmed or were actually ever an actual victim. Or to claim victim status or victimhood over anything, slight things. Anyway, you get the point. It's these communities that are causing a lot of damage in society right now. Because there's strength in numbers. There's a force multiplier in numbers. And generally people are deferential to groups of victims because I don't think humanity is still growing the antibodies to these cancers that the internet has unleashed on us. For example, the dopamine addicting scrolling of social media. I think we're still learning how to deal with that as a human species. And another one is these unhealthy, toxic victim communities online, on Twitter, for example. Like, we haven't yet learned that all you really got to do is evaluate if the victim group is legitimate or not, and then ignore them if they're not. Just literally ignore them. But we haven't done that yet as a species. All right. Well, we'll leave it there.